Hello and welcome to the USA Cares podcast. I'm your host, Matt Castor. I am honored to be with you here again today. Wow, what a great episode we have for you today. And, you know, since we've been doing this podcast for about a year and a half, we've had some amazing guests and just been honored to pull some folks in who can offer some insight, some perspective that in many cases we wouldn't be able to have. So, today's episode is made possible by organizations such as Hardee's and Carl's Jr., Roller Die Informing, and McClellan Integrated Services. We're so thankful for those folks for their efforts and their gifts that allow us to be here with you and allow you to bring an episode like we're going to bring it today. So don't want to waste any time, want to get right to it. Joining us today on the USA Cares podcast for the first time, truly an honor. After a 37-year career in the Army, serving as director of the CIA and finishing his Army career with the rank of general, is General David Petraeus. Sir, welcome to the USA Cares podcast, and thank you for being with us today.
Great to be with you, Matt. Thank you.
We have had such a pleasure to have so many wonderful guests on, and you know, as I mentioned to you, your name just keeps coming up, and as all of these wonderful people share their stories and share their experiences and the people that they admire and enjoyed working with and for, it's been wonderful to hear your stories come up and mentions of you. And I thought, well, how great would it be to have you right here on our podcast and discuss that a little while. So again, thank you.
Look, you know, you meet a lot of people. You're privileged to serve with a lot of great American men and women in uniform. If you serve for 37 years in uniform, actually 4 years as a cadet before that even.
Yes.
And I was incredibly blessed to be able, again, to soldier alongside some really wonderful individuals and individuals from whom I learned as much from as perhaps I was able to help guide them, especially even in the leadership positions, frankly.
Wow. What are some of those, over the span of your career, what are some of those highlight moments, those wonderful moments that stick out to you that really meant so much, either from the side of the Army or from the CIA?
Well, you know, it's very difficult to pick out. Every assignment really had something that was special about it, even those that, let's say in the days of the Hollow Army, where I actually commanded a company at the 24th Infantry Division at Fort Stewart, Georgia, and we were actually literally missing an entire platoon. I mean, you know,
wow.
you only have 3 rifle platoons, and we were missing one because the Army was so undermanned at that time. But folks stepped up. People bore a heavier load. We maintained all those extra vehicles. We did all the tasks that were required and so forth. So even there, again, there were special moments. In fact, it actually was the only unit in that division's history, we believe, that ever achieved the expert infantry company streamer, which you had to have a certain percentage, quite a high percentage. I think it was 65 or 75% of the unit had to earn the expert infantryman badge, which is a really tough test. And, you know, the unit pulled together. We also won the basketball championship. You know, even in these, by the way, I was the head coach. All the lieutenants were the assistant. You know, my view was,
that's funny.
If Petraeus, you know, if Petraeus plays, everybody plays. And one of the times I actually had to coach with camouflage because the unit was in the field. I was given special exemption to bring the basketball team out. And we had the Jeep in those days, not Humvees yet, backed up literally to the gym with the doors open and somebody monitoring the radio in case, I guess, you know, the call came.
You played quietly, I suppose, then.
Yeah, right. No, but it was, again, it's all about focus. It's all about commitment. And it doesn't matter what unit you're in. It can be the best unit in the Army. And I mean, you have to be convinced of that. Yes, we recognize that the Ranger Battalion just down the road clearly was, you know, individuals had gone through a special selection process, very high standards, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, again, any unit can be a great unit if it just all pulls together. And there was a lot of magic there, and we were privileged. But again, there were tons of these. My first assignment was in an airborne battalion combat team in Italy, which really was an elite unit and was really very, very special. That's now an entire brigade now, the 173rd Airborne Brigade. And it just went on like that. Again, and I had a variety of assignments that was very special as well. You know, you're under a rucksack, let's say, for, I don't know, 7, 8 years or something like that. And all of a sudden the Army sends you to graduate school. And, you know, you're about tired of graduate school and you get to be back under a rucksack. But there's a mix of sort of intellectually demanding assignments, leadership assignments, and physically demanding assignments, and sometimes all three of those together. In fact, many times it's all three together. And again, I think only the military provides that in that particular way, and that was very special. And then, of course, as you go along, you know, a battalion in the great 101st Airborne Division, a brigade in the 82nd Airborne Division, incredible vantage point assignments where I get to watch up close and personal the Army and the military's most senior leaders, aide and assistant exec to the chief of staff of the Army for 2 years, executive assistant to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs for 2 years, speechwriter for the Supreme Allied Commander. These were very special as well. Again, I was happy to get out of those, candidly, and get back to infantry. But they were wonderful assignments when it came to learning about from watching others. And then you go back to doing it yourself and studying it and so forth. So, and then, of course, then the war years begin. You know, I'd had along the way a summer in Central America when that was heating up. I got to watch that as, again, a speechwriter for the Commander-in-Chief of Southern Command, then Haiti as a United Nations officer, the Chief of Operations, a Blue Beret, not dual-hatted as an American. A year in Bosnia as a one-star, both NATO and then a U.S. hat that was then a clandestine joint task force doing the war criminal hunt and then doing counterterrorism. And then we begin in Iraq, 2-star, 3-star, 4-star, 101st Airborne Division, the train and equip program, and then command of the surge with one tour back in the States where we got to overhaul everything about the way that we prepared our leaders, our units, our organizational structures, our materiel, everything to prepare for operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, the road to deployment as we termed it. And then, of course, I get to command it during the surge. And, you know, that, you know, if you say what was the most consequential, at the end of the day, it has to be guiding an effort, leading an effort in which our men and women in uniform, together with coalition and Iraqi partners, pulled a country back from a civil war between Sunni and Shia. And so that was quite extraordinary. What they did was really very, very significant. You know, to drive violence down by 85% in the course of 18 months of that surge, and then to command it a bit longer, then to go to U.S. Central Command, have the whole greater Middle East, now including Afghanistan, and then, of course, Afghanistan. I mean, these were really, really very special, extraordinary privileges, really, when you think of the responsibility that you have in that, noting, though, that you got a lot of great people to help you carry that rucksack of responsibility. And then, of course, to lead the CIA, which is just truly an exceptional workforce, incredible missions, tremendous latitude, scope for initiative, and all the rest of that, and authorities and so forth. Again, it doesn't get any better than that. But gosh, I've been privileged since leaving government. You know, in the past 10 years, I've been hired by the second largest investment firm of our type in the world, KKR, to establish and then chair the KKR Global Institute to do geopolitical risk as we're examining potential investments. Just to give your listeners an idea, we manage about $500 billion. We own about 120 companies around the world. We have minority investments in another 100 or more. And we're constantly examining potential investments. And geopolitical risk has become vastly more important over the course of the last 10 years as we've gone from an era of benign globalization in which economics largely drove geopolitics to one of renewed great power rivalries in which geopolitics very much increasingly determines, constrains, creates the context within which investment, trade, economics are carried out. And that's been incredible as well, and to be made a partner there during a period of enormous growth for the firm. I've taught at a variety of different universities and been a fellow or what have you. I think it's about 6 or so now. Currently, it's Yale teaching a course, co-teaching a course on great power rivalries with someone who actually worked for me during the surge in Iraq and did the reconciliation component of British Oxford product. boards of a couple of companies, strategic advisors for some others, a personal venture capitalist, actually. I think my wife and I are invested in about 25 startups, many of them multiple times, and, speaking and all the rest of that. So it's been very, very stimulating. And I think when you reach my point in life, what you're after actually is intellectual stimulation, continued engagement, continued opportunity to contribute in a reasonable fashion, be part of something that is really exciting and important. So I've been very, very fortunate. But of course, you work at that. And I have been lucky over the years, without question. But to a considerable degree, luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. And I tried very hard throughout the course of my time in uniform and afterward to try to be as prepared as I could for opportunities that might arise.
And that's one of the things that the people that I have met that have known you or have worked with you have all said, is that he's the most prepared person, and he emphasizes that to just such a great degree that he's ready for anything that might be thrown at him. And I think that's one of the things that I learned from you and began to study kind of your leadership style and your leadership methods, and to better understand that. What is it about maybe that is unique about your leadership style, either for what you're doing now or what you have done in the Army, that really resonated with so many people?
Well, first of all, when I've been asked what is my leadership style, I have generally replied by saying, I'll tell you what my leadership style is if you'll tell me what style is required to bring out the best in each of those who report directly to me, and the best for the organization collectively as a whole. And sometimes there are subsets. So to give you an example, within the agency, as is well known, there's the operators, the spies, the National Clandestine Service, they're out there trying to recruit sources and steal secrets. That's their job, and they do it brilliantly. There's the analysts. They're very cerebral. There's the science and technology people, again, also really off the charts, brilliant in so many different fields. And then there's the support. And now also you have the essentially the IT and big data and that component that has been added as a fifth big. And each one of those is slightly different. So again, my point here is that I don't think you should have one style, because I don't think one style fits all. What you should try to do is, again, enable each of those who reports directly to you in the organization as a whole and its subsets to be all that they can be. And the way you do that is by trying to figure out what is it that helps you, what fires you up. So, if I'm leading Matt, Matt only needs a pat on the back once a year. Maybe I give him two. Leading Petraeus, he needs reassurance every other hour. But you have to figure out what it is. It's interesting because if you talk to some of the commanders during some of the war years, you'll find some that will say he was the most hands-off leader I ever had. It was just amazing. He allowed me, he gave us broad direction, left and right limits, and let us get down the road and encouraged initiative. In fact, they'll remember that one of the adages that I used to use was, in the absence of orders, figure out what they should have been and execute aggressively. But then there will be others who will say, God, I was the biggest micromanager I ever had. And I'd like to think that it was because that latter individual or individuals required a bit more direction than did the former. And I think that's so your style of leadership, again, shouldn't be, one size fits all. And in fact, obviously during the course of a career, as a young second lieutenant, platoon leader of an airborne infantry platoon, that's a very visceral, it's a very physical, follow me, do as I do, let's do this thing, let's get out, okay, night jumps with heavy equipment and all that stuff, and then walk to daylight. As you progress, obviously, and the span of control increases, the degree of latitude and so forth that you have to allow and encourage, mission command becomes much more important, and so forth and so on. And you get that. And, you have the juncture when you go from just male only to male and female. Then you have bring in aviators and special operators and all the rest of this, and they're all different, and some require a bit of ego management and so on. So, but that's all part of leadership. That said, when you get into the tactics, techniques, and procedures, I do believe in very serious, detailed preparation to the extent that is possible. And so, I took very seriously the commander's guidance that should be given before certain missions. I actually sketched it out for every different type of mission that you can imagine, from defense to offense to, again, different scenarios. And I had notes there so that if you're tired, you don't forget. And this stuff is actually much more complex than people realize. To give you a sense, you owe guidance to every one of the different types of combat and combat support systems and elements, units that you have under your control. And as a brigade commander, that's not just your 3 infantry battalions and the artillery battalion. You're talking about the engineer company, you're talking about the signal company, you're talking about the MP platoon, the air defense, the list goes on very considerably, and they actually all do need certain amounts of guidance. They just can't divine what it is they should do from what you tell the main effort and the supporting effort, say infantry units, to do. And this stuff really pays off. And again, it's vastly more complex, I think, than sometimes people think, and the movies don't quite give this credit. But again, there's a lot of nugging of details about, where do the obstacle belts go in? When do you set it in? When do you trigger it? What about the reserve? What are the indicators? We thought all that through. And as a result, and we practiced it and we rehearsed it and we drilled this. And you have to drill everything. You even drill how you're going to sit on a drop zone after you've jumped in at night and you've linked up with your command post, who sits where. And, we drilled this. My radio operator, one of them, sat right behind me, and the handset was draped over. So I had it, but he actually had an earpiece so that he could hear and tell me if someone was calling me if I missed the call. And then there was another radio operator. But literally, what are the maps that we have? We had boards, special boards. What is the operation schedule that you're tracking down and so forth? This stuff takes real nugging of details. And I was fortunate to have and to build teams of individuals who could really do that stuff. And so you have to drill all of that. You have to know where everything is in the dark. You have to know how are you going to do this? And then how do you move as a unit, even just your own command post, not just all the other elements. And so that's what, being the best rehearsed actually does carry a lot with it. And we tried to do that to the extent that we could. Given the time available and resources and everything else. And that continued. When we deployed to Iraq, when we were going to do the fight to Baghdad, we had to bulldoze a road for something like 80 miles, I think, into the desert, set up a forward area refueling point, which was enormous. It required an entire infantry battalion to secure it. I think it was 12 or more individual refueling points that were hundreds of meters apart because of the dust. You have to have huge bags with the fuel. They have to be bermed up with bulldozers so they don't split. There's nozzles, hoses, pumps, generators, all of this, fire extinguishers. Wow. If you don't get that right, it does not work. Lo and behold, we were the only unit that actually got our refueling point working. The other organization that was supposed to set it up, which had an airfield on which to do it, which I would have loved to have had, hard stand, much easier. You don't have to worry about all these issues. They could not get theirs going. And it was because they had not sufficiently rehearsed something that is very, very challenging. And yet we got it. We pumped 500,000 gallons of JP8 in the first 2 weeks. Think of the number of 5,000-gallon tankers, which we also found never hold 5,000 gallons all with. So, but this is the kind of you got to nug these details and just drill them endlessly. So But you have, in other areas, obviously, you are going to allow a considerable degree of latitude. And it's figuring out where is it that you need to focus so that the organization is going to be able to perform the mission that it's called on to do.
In the midst of your leadership, you've also shown great compassion to many people, though. And our mutual friend, Colonel Johnson, tells a story of an incident that occurred with a soldier who misfired their weapon and you were injured. And, that would have been easy for you to end the career of multiple people as a result of that incident. But instead, you showed compassion to them. And that story in and of itself carries through. And I'm sure that has to be a great encouragement to many people as well.
Well, look, first of all, I think you have to, especially if you're a leader, I think you actually genuinely have to like people. You have to, in the Army, you have to love soldiers. And if you don't, at a certain point, you can't fake it. And so you really do have to have that. It has to be sincere. Second, I've, always believed in the golden rule and tried to act on that. Even when recognizing that perhaps someone isn't measuring up. And in the war years, if you have even a general officer that's not measuring up, you can't carry that individually. The troops deserve better. And there were individuals that went home earlier than they had expected to, but you don't have to destroy them on the way out. You don't have to do what we would call a public execution. In fact, you should send them out with their dignity intact and so forth, if they tried, not if there was some kind of serious mistake.
Yes.
But in general, that's what we did. Now, I would also follow it up with a call to the chief of the service from which the individual came, saying that, this individual shouldn't do command again or shouldn't do this job again, maybe shouldn't be promoted, maybe shouldn't be continued in service. But again, you don't have to, carry out some kind of public execution. In the case of this, this is a very aggressive live fire exercise. I was pushing for very aggressive live fire exercise. That's how you're ready when the time comes. I even had the assistant division commander for operations who loved our live fire exercise. He actually flew out and joined us. This is on a Saturday morning, by the way.
Yeah.
So we weren't on the golf course. We'd gotten up at 2 or 3 in the morning. We did a walk to daylight. I think it was at least 12 miles with all full equipment and everything else, several hours. And then went right into actually a dry fire. Then we backed up, did an after-action review, and then did the live fire. We were throwing live grenades, which is very rarely done except, over a barrier or something like that. We're throwing them into bunkers. This is high adventure. Yeah. They don't always go into the bunker. And so there was a lot of danger involved here. But Fred did this better than anybody. Fred was the most inspirational young leader I've ever encountered anywhere. I mean, he had sparks. I just loved being around him. Everybody got so fired up. They got so inspired. He was such a professional. Talk about preparation. Talk about the details, drilling this, getting it. I mean, we didn't finger drill anything. We did it. Finger drill means you just sort of, you talk about it or you pencil whip it or something like that. It actually was done. And so we took all this stuff very, very seriously. Rates of fire, and again, the technical expertise in that unit was really extraordinary. But there was a mistake. Soldier knocked out a bunker with a grenade, goes in, sprays it, comes out. And, there's a lot of adrenaline flowing here. And he tripped on the stop step. His weapon came down. We think he squeezed off a round. He tensed up as he came down, and the round went through my chest and kept on going. This is a fairly serious wound. Happily, it didn't sever an artery, it nicked an artery. It severs, you're gone within a minute or so. You bleed out. But if it's just seeping as it was, if they can stabilize you, get you in, and get a chest tube in you, you're going to survive. And so they did. And it was a pretty traumatic thing for the unit. I was going into shock as well, and I was saying, don't worry about me, guys. Just put me up against a tree, do a quick after-action review, and do it again. By the way, don't cut my stuff off because it took me hours to tie it all down. We had this very extensive SOP on how we tied everything down and taped it down, and it was part of our meticulous preparation. Anyway, they got a medevac aircraft in. General Keene, the assistant division commander, who later commanded the division when I was his operations officer, later was a 4-star vice chief of staff of the Army and acting chief, longtime mentor. goes in with me. They get the chest tube in, incredibly painful because there's no anesthesia whatsoever. They just cut an X in your side and jam this plastic tube in there, and it's pretty excruciating. But then once that's draining, you're not going to suffocate in your own fluids. You're going to be okay. But then they put me back in a helicopter and flew me down to Vanderbilt Medical Center to cut it open. And of all things, a doctor named Bill Frist was brought in. Again, it was a Saturday, now late morning or early afternoon, who later would be the majority leader of the Senate. So I used to jokingly say I was dying to meet Dr. Frist.
That's great.
But it, so I said, look, I'm really worried about the soldier and the unit. Get the soldier down here. So I had the chaplain bring the soldier down to Nashville. And I said, hey, look, big guy, your Ranger School slot's still there. Don't worry. Stuff happens. I mean, this is no big deal. Actually, it was great because it helped me build mystique or something like that. I mean, and then, and I got back at it, and I was very impatient to get, the other part of the story is they sent me back to the post hospital, and I just got tired of being there. I was walking laps with a wheelchair with all the tubes in it. I finally said, if I do 50 push-ups, is that enough to get out of here? And they said, yeah, so I did. And they let me out. But again, things happen. And if they are honest mistakes, even if it shoots somebody, so be it. Let's get back to it. Let's learn what we can from it. And actually we did. We changed, it used to be that you had your finger inside the trigger housing group. That's actually not the best place to have it, because if you do trip and you tense, you're going to have an accident. Accidental discharges are serious in war as well as in peace, maybe even more so in war, because so we put it alongside, and you can still get it in there very, very, very quickly. So again, instead of being inside, you have it alongside the trigger housing group. So again, you learn from that. We, did an after-action review and continued the operations and continued the exercises. And by the way, we continued those when I was a brigade commander in the 82nd Airborne Division, when I was back at the 101st as a division commander. I mean, our hallmark was very aggressive live fires, and also very aggressive exercises using indirect fires, where we would get light mortars, heavy mortars, 105 howitzers, and 155 all lined up for a single company's worth of leaders, not all the troops. You don't need the troops out there as training aids. And we would do we called it a walk and shoot, and it was not canned. It was not, they didn't just read a script, which is normally what people did on combined arms live fire exercises. They didn't know what they were going to shoot because we didn't know. And I went with the company commander. I had lieutenant colonels with the platoon leaders, and we knew what the ranges were and all the safety measures. And we'd just say, okay, see that Hulk out there? That's a rifle platoon coming at you. What do you do now, Ranger, kind of thing? And they have to, and they're all at doctrinal distances. But that became very valuable. And to facilitate that at Fort Campbell, where we didn't have quite the nice terrain that we had at Fort Bragg, where you come over a hill and can go into the impact, we would clear into the impact area a couple of kilometers so we could shoot all around ourselves as well. But at Fort Campbell, we literally built hills, so we had the observation into the impact area that we needed. And lo and behold, during the fight to Baghdad, in one of the big battles, I remember catching up with the battalion commander. I said, well, how's it going? He said, sir, this is sort of like the walk and shoot. And you could see it. He had all his units out there, and you can see them using the indirect fires in ways that they'd been trained to do. And that's very technically demanding. Which call of fire do you use? Which weapon system do you use? What radio net is that system on? Where is the priority target? In other words, where is the gun laid right now? What's the fastest way to get steel on target? Is it to shoot that target or to adjust? Again, which fuse setting? All of this, again, we used to call it Fire Support Olympics. So we got very serious about this stuff, and it pays off in combat. Preparation.
Wow. It's all about preparation.
And demanding training. I mean, the most realistic, challenging, demanding. Again, in that unit with Fred, instead of doing physical training for an hour, we literally did it for 90 minutes. That's a long time. That means you can do a serious amount of stretching, calisthenics, run, road march, whatever it is, and all kinds of other stuff. And we had a whole cycle, a rhythm to what we did. We'd lock the barracks. You couldn't go back inside. We didn't allow people to go into gyms because they go in there when it's cold and wet. infantry is still an outdoor sport, so we stayed outside. And also in gyms, most people don't know what to do anyway. It's called weight watching rather than weight lifting. There's only a handful of people in a unit that actually really are in there enough to actually know what weights and how to do that. So again, this is serious stuff, but it then paid off because you win the post cross country championship, the softball championship, the football championship, you name it. If it's competitive, we were going to be out there competing, but you need to compete to be the best team player at a lot of times in life, not just the best individuals or best unit as well.
Well said. Do you have time for a few more questions? I know we are over your time, but I want to be respectful of that.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, you just kind of circling back a little bit of the analysis work you do with KKR, some of the posting that you do. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about the conflict with Russia and Ukraine. And I see posts often, and you give analysis, you give detailed maps and show kind of the movement and progression of this situation. Where will this play out in your opinion? Where will this play out? Yep. And what is going to be the end result for President Putin?
It depends, and I'll lay out what it depends on. And first of all, let me just note that all I do is distill what the Institute for the Study of War does in enormous detail. And so I'm trying to present an executive summary with some of my own. I did command a couple of wars, and I've been to Ukraine a number of times and so forth, not since the war, but over the years, watched their professional development, which was very impressive. And I was one of the very few who said before the war started, they will not take Kyiv, much less ever control it.
Wow.
When a lot of people were conceding that they were going to take Kyiv and everything up to the Dnipro River and maybe farther. So again, this is the work by the Institute of Study War. I'm on their board. There's also the Petraeus Center for Emerging Leaders, so I'm tied into them but it's their work that I'm basically taking and
Understood.
distilling to present within the number of characters or whatever that LinkedIn allows, which is actually pretty good because it forces you, and it forces me then to go through their detailed work each night and figure out what should those who read this stuff want as the headlines, the key takeaways. The future does depend. It depends a great deal on whether or not the U.S. and Western assistance continues as robustly as it has. There's a couple of big issues out there right now. Will there be Western tanks, especially the Leopard 2 from Germany? Everyone's waiting to see what happens this Friday at Ramstein Air Base in Germany, whether Germany will finally give the approval or if it takes longer. And the U.S. has to provide some M1 Abrams tanks to get the Germans to give the Leopard 2s. But that's a big question. It depends on whether or not Putin can really generate the kind of additional forces and weapon systems and armored vehicles and all the rest of that, given the sanctions and export controls imposed on Russia and the challenges they're having. And, the last time they did a recruiting drive, more men left the country than actually went to the recruiting stations.
Wow.
But they still managed to get 200,000 troops, and that quantity has a quality of its own, of course. Beyond that, the question is, can Ukraine take advantage of what I think is a window of opportunity before the latest batch of mobilized recruits in Russia is into the force? And can they achieve combined arms effects, which Russia has not been able to do? Russia just basically runs tanks at the enemy, they get stopped, and then they just destroy what's in front of them, and then they go a little farther. Very costly way. They throw bodies into this. The losses are staggering. They've already lost probably now 9 times what they lost in nearly 10 years of war in Afghanistan.
Wow.
In just the first 11 months in Ukraine. But the question is, when does Vladimir Putin finally recognize that this is unsustainable if it comes out that way? In other words, look, the losses on the battlefield are too great, and the damage to the economy, the financial system, his personal individuals because of personal sanctions as well as financial and economic sanctions, and the damages to the industries because of export controls. When does that make this just unsustainable in the way that Afghanistan became unsustainable for the USSR? But of course, that took over 9 years to reach that point. And When that happens, and I think it will, and not knowing where the lines will be at that time, I hope that Ukraine is able to liberate everything at the very least that Russia sees since 24 February, if not all that they took since 2014. But at some point, Ukraine also will need a negotiated resolution. Russia will need it because it needs to get out of Ukraine and get out from underneath the financial, economic, and personal sanctions and export controls, noting that their economy is only down by about 3.5% this past year, not the 10% that I think a lot of the economists had hoped would be the case. They have gas, oil, coal that the rest of the world needs and many countries will still buy despite these sanctions, and a variety of special minerals and other commodities as well. But Ukraine has got to get the bombing to stop, the almost merciless use of missiles, rockets, Iranian-provided drones, which are targeting civilian infrastructure, especially that which generates electricity, transmits it, and then powers water systems. And again, until they can stop that, obviously it's going to be impossible to rebuild this infrastructure, to rebuild their economy, and they're going to need a security guarantee. Again, I don't know where the lines will be at that time. As I said, I hope, because we continue to very robustly support Ukraine, and they've been so incredibly impressive as they develop capabilities and generate additional forces. And if they can achieve combined arms, so it's tanks plus infantry, plus engineers, plus artillery, plus mortars, plus air defense, plus EOD, plus electronic warfare, all the rest of that, if they can do all of that, then they can make some more breakthrough kind of offensives, as they did in the east at Kharkiv and south of Kharkiv this past fall. But it all depends, and there's a number of factors on which it depends. We'll see how those play out in the months and possibly years that lie ahead, because right now I think Vladimir Putin still looks in the mirror and doesn't see somebody who made a catastrophically bad decision for his country. He sees a leader of a proud Russian people who outsuffered the Nazis and Napoleon's army, and they are going to outsuffer the Ukrainians, the Europeans, and the Americans. We have to prove him wrong. We've got to provide everything we can as quickly as we can so that Ukraine can take advantage of an opportunity at what I think is another one of these pivotal times in Ukraine, with the lines having been relatively static despite Russian offensives. And then, again, see how this does play out in the spring, if they can take back more of that territory, cause more losses, and again, eventually get to the point where Vladimir Putin recognizes that this war is unsustainable. We need to hasten that moment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know so many Americans are standing behind Ukraine and want to see this come to an end for them. So many of their civilians have been the ones to suffer with these rockets raining in. And so certainly we hope for that. But we appreciate your analysis. I think one of the wonderful things, there's a lot of negatives about social media, but one of the real positives is that we can gain news and updates from someone like you that isn't coming from a news source, a main headlining news source, but it's coming directly from an organization that is studying this and researching this. So certainly appreciate all of the analysis that you share when it comes to this complicated situation.
Again, no organization has done that better than the Institute for the Study of War. I mean, I think they have certainly less than 45 or 50 staff members, and they are punching so far above their weight class that it's not funny. Their maps, their analysis is routinely used by every major newspaper, news channel, and other media organization. And it's been really a privilege to, again, oversee that as a member of the board and active with the Petraeus Center for Emerging Leaders there.
Is there a website or other information where someone who is interested in this conflict or learning more about the organization?
You bet. Yep. Just Google Institute for the Study of War and it'll pop right up.
Perfect. Okay. Changing gears slightly, and again, I want to be respectful of your time, but as you and I have messaged back and forth, and we've had conversations. We've talked about the veteran families, many of whom listen to this podcast. They're the families that USA Cares serves. They're the ones we have been dedicated to helping for the last 20 years, since the surge back into Iraq in 2003. And so many of them are at a unique place in their life because a lot of them joined after September 11th. They worked through these conflicts, they worked through these situations, and many of them served in Afghanistan. And they see the end of that conflict, and they try to look back at their careers and say, were my efforts worth it? Were the friends I lost, was it all worth it? Whether they're battling PTSD or traumatic brain injury or other situations in addition to that. What encouragement, what do you say to individuals like that who are trying to kind of piece it all together?
Well, I think that those who answered the call after 9/11 in particular deserve to be recognized as America's new greatest generation. Raised their right hand, took an oath at a time of war, went off and fought those wars, re-enlisted in many cases during those wars. The biggest re-enlistment ceremony in history, we believe, was the one for which I was privileged to be the re-enlistment officer. It was 1,215 soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines in a huge former palace of Saddam Hussein outside Baghdad near the airport at Camp Victory. I thought how fitting as I looked at this. I mean, they're barely fitting into this massive cupola dome. There's even a photo above the fold in the New York Times the next day. This was on July 4th of 2008. So we're 18 months into the surge, and I'm looking out and wondering, what is this all about?
Yes.
There's no stock options here. The economy at that time, we didn't realize that it was on the verge of the Great Recession. It was at historic low unemployment. So there were lots of opportunities, ostensibly, had they completed their time in service, ETS'd, and gone home. And here they are re-enlisting in a war zone, knowing they're going to go back to a war zone because of the demands at that time. Remember, that was a period when we were doing a year out and a year back, or in the Army, actually, during the surge, it was 15 months out and a year or so back. And all I could gather was that, there's three really special elements. And by the way, you can't completely replace them after service. You can partly, though. And the first is a mission that's larger than self at a time of enormous consequence for our country. I mean, this is a big deal. And you feel a privilege to be involved with that. You don't beat your chest and wake up every morning and say, hey, how privileged I am to be performing a mission larger than self, but you go about it and there's a sense of that significance of what you're engaged in. The second is the privilege of doing it with others who feel the same way. And again, they're not saying to each other how privileged I am to serve with you, but there's that sense of that. And of course, the intense relationships, especially in the brotherhood of the close fight, but really throughout any of these organizations, again, when you're deployed for these different wars in the post 9/11 period. And then the third was an awareness that Americans back home deeply appreciated what it is that we were doing, even if they didn't agree with the policy we were implementing. There was this recognition. We got this right this time as opposed to, say, during Vietnam. Yeah. But there was an enormous outpouring of support for those in uniform and for their families and for veterans. So we were part of something very special.
Yes.
Even if the ultimate policy decision when it came to Afghanistan by two consecutive administrations resulted in an outcome that, in my view, was not necessary. There were alternatives, and the ultimate outcome was heartbreaking and disastrous, frankly.
Yes.
That being said, we did what we were asked to do. In the case of Afghanistan, we provide 20 years of real opportunity for the Afghan people. We did accomplish the missions, particularly during certain periods when I was privileged to command there. The mission was to ensure that al-Qaeda could not reestablish a sanctuary, provide a platform for dealing with al-Qaeda regionally. Of course, that's when we brought Osama bin Laden to justice in Pakistan. Push back the Taliban, halt their momentum and roll them back, accelerate the development of the Afghan security forces and particular institutions, and begin transitioning tasks to them, all of which actually was done. And by and large, again, we generally accomplished. Now, it took us 9 years to get the inputs right in Afghanistan because we very quickly shifted focus to Iraq. But again, those that served there, I think, again, should be quietly proud of what it is that they did. And the same with Iraq, where, again, as I mentioned, the situation was very, very dire in late 2006 when President Bush decided to conduct a surge instead of to go home, and selected a new commander and ambassador, and empowered us enormously, provided additional forces, allowed us to completely reverse what we've been doing. Instead of consolidating on big bases, go back into the neighborhoods, clear, hold, not clear and leave or clear and hand off, take back control from the Iraqi security forces, promote reconciliation, the Anbar Awakening, get that to develop further, bring the Sunni Arabs back into the fold, and pursue the irreconcilables even more relentlessly with our special mission units and so forth, all then building on the security gains in a variety of different programs to show the Iraqis that their life would be better if they support us and then their government than supporting either the al-Qaeda extremists, Sunni insurgents, or Iranian-supported Shia militia. So again, I think, we should all feel that we were part of something that was very special when our country needed us to do that. We should also recognize, again, you can't find quite the same intensity of mission larger than self and others and all the rest of this in most outside positions. But there are. I mean, I'm very proud to be part of KKR as an example. I actually look down, I have a bag and it has KKR on one side and nothing on the other. I look down and make sure that the KKR is facing out. I want them to know. I'm proud to wear the KKR t-shirt. That's true of many firms, I think, in America. And you can find positions that where, again, it is important, it matters, it's intellectually stimulating, it's rewarding, and you can, again, feel that you're part of something that is special. So, when I'm asked by veterans for advice on transition, what I often offer is, most significantly, I think, is to look for an opportunity that will allow you to have a career, not just a job. A job is an hourly wage for whatever the number of hours is for doing a particular task. A career is an opportunity to advance, to be promoted, to grow. They're going to invest in you with training, maybe education, mentoring, affinity groups, all of this. That's what you want to seek. And at a time of historically low unemployment, and by the way, the veterans' unemployment now is even lower, yes, especially for former active duty. The National Guard and Reserve are different because the context is different for them in their communities and so forth. But the unemployment rate of former active duty servicemen and women is a good bit lower than what is already a historically low unemployment rate. And that even includes those who are in school with the GI Bill actually being listed as unemployed. So businesses out there want veterans. KKR's companies, to give you an example, have hired over 100,000 veterans and spouses, because we believe the spouses also bring something special. That there are these special values, special experiences, there's special expertise. All that they've gone through makes them, again, very, very special. And it didn't take much convincing. I'm also, as an additional duty, as they say, the chairman of the Vets at Work program. Yep. And again, very early on in this program, businesses recognized this isn't just the right thing to do. This is the smart thing to do. And we want more veterans. And anything you can do to help us connect with veterans, they do. And so, for example, we host an annual job fair. And we'll get thousands of veterans and actually serving members who are about to complete their service, and spouses who will show up at these. We do them typically near major bases or in major areas where there's a lot of bases. And they've been incredibly successful. We typically will have anywhere from 65 to 75 or so companies. We partner with other companies like ours that own lots of companies. And again, we don't have to arm twist. All we need to do is tell them when to show up and where to be, because they see this pool of potential employees as being very attractive. So, but the big idea here, and you always got to get the big ideas right. That's the most important component of leadership, by the way. Then you got to communicate them, oversee the implementation, determine how to refine them, and do it again. But got to get the big ideas right. The big idea here is career, not just job. And so don't jump too quickly. Don't take the first opportunity that presents itself. Look for the right opportunity and ensure that there's potential for advancement, potential for them to invest in you, to help you grow, learn, develop, and professionally advance.
Well, thank you for that. I'm sure that's a great encouragement to all of our veterans who are listening to this podcast. You've been very generous with your time today. I want to be respectful of your time. Is there anything else that you want to make sure you mention today?
Well, I highlighted again that I think that those who served in the post 9/11 period in particular, and in the post 9/11 wars, deserve to be recognized as America's new greatest generation. And I think that they are demonstrating that, keeping in mind that the greatest generation, the World War II crowd, wasn't just great because they saved the world for democracy and so forth and dealt with the Nazis and so forth. It's what they did when they came home. And you see that, I think, in America as well. Those who have served are contributing enormously to what is yet another wave of economic growth. Now we're going to invest a great deal in a number of different industries and so forth. The infrastructure investment that lies ahead is going to be very significant. Taking advantage of the GI Bill, making the most of that. We're now even seeing them through the Warrior Scholar Program and so forth to get into these great universities. Finally, the Ivy Leagues have allowed transfer students. There were very, very few undergraduates, for example, at my graduate alma mater, Princeton, and many others. And now, all of a sudden, they're recognizing as well. So, again, I think that this generation should be very proud of what it was they were part of and what they did, even though in one of those cases, the outcome was not what we hoped it would be.
Sure.
General, I have a quick question, and
Sure.
I'm known to pop these random ones in, but I noticed over your shoulder the painting behind you, which looks to be maybe like a soldier with a child.
Yeah, actually, this is one of the happiest days in Iraq. It was during the fight to Baghdad. I was a two-star general, the commander of the Great 101st Airborne Division. This was right after the Battle of Karbala, which is the second holiest site in Shia Islam. We'd just a few days earlier liberated the holiest site, which is the holy city of Najaf, after a battle of several days, tough fighting, uphill, temperatures getting higher. And so we walked into Karbala. The enemy had collapsed. We'd won. We're sort of in that moment of transition, moving into the city. And this little kid came running down the street. And, keep in mind, the Iraqis did welcome us. There's a little mythology that really wasn't the case. They did. It was later on, after we made some mistakes and some other things, that was not quite as effusive. But in the beginning, they were happy to be out from under Saddam Hussein, especially in the Shia areas, noting that he was a Sunni Arab, which was a majority sect of less than 20% of the country, yet ruling a country that was 65% Shia. And this little kid jumped in my arms, actually, and someone took a photo of it. It got back to someone, and somebody did a portrait of it when I was at Fort Campbell and presented it to us as I was leaving, actually to go back to Iraq pretty quickly after we got home. It's really a prized possession because it just reminds me of a moment that was very, very special. There were many hard days, weeks, years after that. But at that moment, it was really, really, really quite extraordinary. And to have liberated a city, in the process a country, from a brutal, kleptocratic dictator who had done terrible things to his own people, including the Shia and the Kurds in particular, was again an extraordinary privilege. And to lead America's sons and daughters, and especially the great Screaming Eagles of the 101st, that was something to remember, and it's a very fond memory.
Love that.
General, thank you so much. On behalf of all of us at USA Cares, to our 24 chapters around the country, and to all the veterans we serve, it really is an honor to speak with you. And we just really appreciate your time and look forward to seeing what's ahead for you. So Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
And,
thanks, Matt. A privilege to be with you, and thanks for what USA Cares is doing.
It's our pleasure. Thank you. Wow, what a great conversation with General Petraeus. Definitely some interesting perspectives. I love the fact that he calls this post 9/11 group of men and women America's new greatest generation. And what a powerful statement that is when we talk about the original greatest generation out of World War II and the impact that they had not only during the war but after the war, and the idea that this generation can have even stronger impact on the United States. So truly amazing. Some interesting insights on Russia and Ukraine as well. But just some amazing stories from an incredible leader. So I hope you took a lot from this episode. I know that I did. I would love to hear back from you all. USACarespodcast.org. There is an option to put some comments, some feedback. Would love to get your thoughts on this episode. And it's not often we get to spend time with such a leader. So would love to hear from you. If you'd like to learn more about USA Cares, go to usacares.org and check out all the things going on. Find a chapter in your local community and get involved today. Thank you so much for being with us. Please hit that subscribe button. Make this part of your weekly routine, and we look forward to being with you again soon.